Welcome to 205H Part 3. We're going to talk about Section 76, which has to do with temporary installations for construction sites. First, we're going to discuss the general rules that apply to all temporary services. 76.14 states that all of our temporary installations must be kept fully separate from our permanent installations. This means that if I have a temporary service on my site, I cannot be running any permanent equipment from that service. There can be no crossover between the two. 76.16 states that if I'm going to have any 15 or 20 amp receptacles on my temporary service, they all need to be GFCI protected. That way, if someone is using a tool in the rain, they're going to be protected from any serious shock. 76006 states that if I'm going to put my temporary service outside, such as on a pole mount, I need to make sure of a few different things. First of all, it needs to be accessible to only people who are authorized to deal with it. So only the people at the construction site, specifically you. Next, it needs to be lockable. We need to make sure that the general public cannot get their hands into this. And it needs to be protected from weather as well as mechanical damage. So we need to place it somewhere where we're going to make sure that it's going to be safe. If we are mounting a service on a single pole, then we need to make sure that that temporary service does not exceed 200 amps. Keeping in mind that my service conductors for my temporary installation can be either fed underground or overhead. Either way, I'm going to follow Section 6 in order to do that installation. When it comes to the distribution centers and how many circuits should be available, I have to follow Section 14. And I need to make sure that I'm going to have enough circuits available to accommodate the job site. Once again, if this is an outdoor panel, all my receptacles must be weatherproofed. All the temporary services will need to be mounted in an upright position, so it's not leaning back or anything else. We do want it to be vertical. And all of our receptacles need to face out and not up, to make sure that nothing could collect inside the receptacles themselves. A very popular option is to use mobile distribution centers. If we are using this type of distribution centers, the feeders need to be of armored cable. It can be flexible conductors, but only if it's of the extra hard usage for portable distribution centers, so it has to be approved for the use. 72002 states that any conductors that we're going to use within our temporary services can follow Section 12 rules for our conductor selection. And we can use flexible wiring, but once again, we need to make sure it's extra hard usage. So check rules 412 and 440 for that. For our service conductors, we need to make sure that we are installing them according to other sections of this code book as well. When it comes to grounding and bonding of our temporary services, we need to follow Section 10, and this is stated in Rule 76004. The one exception is that STANDATA does allow us to use only one ground rod as long as it's 3 meters long, pounded to its full length. Where a typical installation would require 2 ground rods, STANDATA does allow us to use only 1 ground rod, but it's only for the specific purpose of our temporary installations. Make sure you are checking with your inspector and that he approves this usage as well. For our branch circuits inside our temporary installations, we need to read through Rule 7612. 7612 tells me that we are allowed to use an NMD90 cable for any of our temporary wiring, but we need to follow rules 12500 to 12526 for our installation of these NMD cables. Any of our lighting and our power circuits must be kept separate. We are going to have dedicated lighting circuits and we're going to have dedicated power circuits. Any of our lighting circuits are subject to Section 30 and they are only to be loaded to a maximum of 80% of the overcurrent device. We do not want to overload our lighting circuits because if we accidentally trip the breaker, we could create a much more dangerous situation than what already exists. Any of our power branch circuits that are involving motors that are bigger than just a hand tool, we need to follow the rules of Section 28, which will tell us our conductor size and our overcurrent device size, as well as our overload setting sizes. Any of our heating loads that would be part of our power branch circuits can only load up to 80% of the overcurrent device as well, because we do not want to lose heat on our job sites. And for anything else, such as our general use receptacles, our overcurrent device is going to be based on the size of the receptacles in that circuit. So if we have a 20 amp receptacle, we're going to use a 20 amp breaker. 15 amp receptacle would require a 15 amp breaker, and so on and so forth. We want to make sure that all of our different loads within our temporary services are separate from each other, as well as being separate from any permanent installations. Remember, we cannot power permanent devices with our temporary services. Section 76 is not a very big section, so I do recommend that you read through it all. You've now reached the end of 205H. Make sure you are reviewing all the videos as well as all of your modules. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me.